apologize that we are just a few minutes behind schedule, but we've got some important things we want to discuss. So I appreciate everyone hanging around to make the hearing possible. We'll go ahead and jump right in. And I'd like to invite my friend, Commissioner Willie Simmons, to start off. We're going to ask Commissioner Simmons, who represents the Central District, to start us off with opening remarks, welcome, or whatever you'd like to lead in with, Commissioner. Thank you. Yes.
Chairman Brandon, thank you for inviting us and allowing us to come, and to the members of this great committee. And I say this great committee because I'm a little bit biased in that I was once the chairperson. So in my opinion, this is the best committee in the state Senate. So thank you for allowing us to come. We have with us today Brad White, who you all know and love because of everything that he has done. And we are so excited to have him as our CEO for the Department of Transportation. We stole him from the governor, and he's been a lot of other places. So he knows the system and is doing us well as the state. But let me just quickly say how much I appreciate you, Senator Brandon, for your leadership and what you, the committee, and the entire legislative body has done for the Department of Transportation. As you well know, this past year, we received the largest budget that we have ever received from the state legislature. $1.4 billion, which included new monies that came from Washington through the IIJ Act, but the state legislature stepped up and gave us additional money. In doing that, you gave us discretionary language to deal with our issue with staff salary. We was having a brain drain, so to speak. Folks was leaving us like deer you see running across the highway because they was looking for something on the other side. You have helped us to change that. In addition to that, you gave us federal match money that we so much needed for the additional money we was getting from the federal government. You gave us maintenance money. You gave us money for the emergency road and bridge, which went to the local counties. And you gave us capacity money. In giving us the capacity money, what that did is put us in a position where we can begin to look at capacity needs in the state and invest monies in pre-construction. And we're in the process of doing that. Brad would talk more about that. You also kept the lottery money coming to us, the $80 million that was put in place in 2018. But historically, let me just say to you that the legislature, I'm going to look back and quickly say to you that legislatively, we have seen 4 historic years for MDOT. 1987, you passed the 87 Highway Program, which was a great program that the legislature did, but they did not put in the maintenance monies into it, as you well know. In 2001, the legislature came back and gave us Vision 21. Vision 21 is the foundation for the 3-year plan that you have in front of you. And in 2018, we, the legislature, at that time, I was in the Senate, passed the Alice Clark Lottery Fund, which give the Department of Transportation $80 million a year. And then last year, 2002, the greatest appropriation that we have ever received, $1.4 billion. Great. Now, currently, we have a situation that we are looking at, cost index. Since 1987, we have seen our cost for materials in gravel, rocks, asphalt, steel, increase over 600%. But we have kept the same funding formula that we had, the 18 cents per gallon at the pump. Lower fuel consumption because vehicles are getting more mileage. Freight vehicles are no longer using diesel fuel in the manner which they have in the past. And then the future, electric and hybrid vehicles. That impact is going to decrease monies at the pump that we collect. So with that, we just like to say to you that MDOT needs annually about $300 million to maintain what we already have, and about another $4 billion to look at the future for what we need for capacity. So the $35 million that we put into capacity projects, the pre-construction, is giving us an opportunity to look at the $4 billion big landscape. We are hoping that in the future, we can talk to you and you will consider giving us recurring money for that purpose. So let me thank you for giving me an opportunity to come, and I yield back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your comments. Does anybody on the committee have any questions or comments for the commissioner? Okay. Thank you so much. We'll now call Brad White, Executive Director of MDOT. He's going to come up and give us an update on what the department has been doing over the last year. And I believe he's got some visuals there for us behind the podium.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I'm going to leave this with y'all so you can review. It's a map similar to one that we provided to you last year that maps out the projects that are in the 3-year plan that will be obligating funds or have obligating funds towards, as well as the projects that were awarded to contract last year. And it gives you kind of a good snapshot of where that work is being done or will be done in the future across the state. I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about the last time we visited, which I guess was my confirmation hearing. And we talked about the challenges that we're facing MDOT and where we thought we needed to go as an agency to help address those challenges. And they fell into categories of communication, staffing, and funding. And to deal with our communication issues, what you've got in front of you is a consolidated, organized book of all the projects the Department of Transportation has obligated funds towards and where we see our agency moving over the course of the next 3 years. This is a snapshot in time. I would remind you that there are various factors that come into place that might require certain projects to be moved a little bit within that plan. There are certain needs that may occur, obviously, over the period of 3 years that would cause the commission to need to add projects to that list. But this gives you a snapshot in time of where the revenue of the Department of Transportation is intended to be spent over the next few years. You'll find that it lists our pavement programs, the lottery program, bridge program, highway safety improvement programs, our capacity program that Commissioner Simmons was talking about that we've been able to restart after about a 10-year hiatus, operational improvements, planning, as well as the needs analysis that Division 21 law requires. Based on the feedback that the staff at MDOT received, both from the commissioners as well as the legislature and the legislative leadership, it was our goal to advance as many projects as possible while still being financially responsible to the taxpayers. And to that end, the state fiscal year of 22 saw a drastic increase in the amount of awards that the commission made. From July 1 of 2021 to June 30th of 2022, the commission awarded over $964 million worth of highway and bridge projects. That is an 80% increase over the average of the previous 5 years. And I believe that this plan illustrates our commitment as an agency to keep this momentum going. I mentioned to you right off the bat that one of our biggest challenges was that of staffing, having the ability of retaining good staff and then recruiting good staff. As most of you know, I worked at the Department of Transportation about 25 years ago. And at the time that I came to work at the department back in the 90s, most of the people that made up the engineering and management staff around the 10th floor had about a 30-year tenure with the department. And that could be said of our district engineers, it could be said of many of our division heads at that time. However, upon me returning in 2021, that number had shrank drastically. We had lost a lot of our institutional knowledge, and our employees had gone down from about 3,000 employees to about 2,500 employees. And the reason that's important to you is that back in 1987, when the legislature gave the then highway department the 87 4-lane program, a lot of the pre-construction, pre-engineering phases of work was done internally by staff. And if you were to give us a program of that magnitude at this time, we would be ill-equipped to be able to handle it all inside and would have to farm out to the private sector a lot of that work that comes sometimes about 3 times the cost, we believe, of what it would cost us to do with our own employees. I'm happy to report to you And I cannot say enough nice things about the State Personnel Board and the staff over there and their work with us to try to take the tools that you gave us and the authority of our last appropriation bill and begin addressing this problem. Since I last met with you last year, we've been able, through the SEC Squared, to increase our starting salary for engineers by about 20%. We've been able to increase our starting salary for our maintenance team by about 25%. And this has allowed us to stop the bleeding or the hemorrhaging of personnel and to begin recruiting people back. So I'm excited about where that's going and look forward to continuing to work with the personnel board to keep that momentum going as well, because we've come a long way in adjusting these salaries, but we still got a long way to go. With regard to funding, I would remind you that the taxpayers of Mississippi have investment in their transportation system that is valued at about $65 billion around the state. That's our current investment in the transportation system. We have a list of identified needs through the Vision 21 law that allowed staff to go in and evaluate what improvements need to be made to this system to increase its safety and to increase its efficiency and to add to the capacity of the system. And those needs alone represent about $6 billion worth of needs. To give you a little bit of comparison, if you take all the roadway that we're responsible for maintaining, you could build a road all the way around the equator and still have enough miles left to build another road from Jackson, Mississippi to Honolulu. So that's what your Department of Transportation is responsible for taking care of. And then on top of that, we have the $6 billion list of identified needs. And with that, we, thanks to the additional funding, as Commissioner Simmons mentioned, that we received from the Federal Highway Administration, as well as the supplemental funding that the legislature gave us, we were able to have our largest budget ever of $1.43 billion. One of the best things that you did for us last year was not earmarking our federal program. Any of the funds that was given to the department with a specific project need was given in the way of supplemental funds. And the reason that that is important is that allowed our staff, who does a very good job of playing what I can't describe in any other way than a shell game of sorts, of looking at the various mechanisms through which the federal dollars come to us from the Federal Highway Administration and how to best make sure that we're maximizing the use of those dollars. And through being able to have complete flexibility within that program, we've been able to increase the amount of projects that we would have gotten to by virtue of being able to maximize the use of federal dollars. And not just highway and bridge projects. We're able to start addressing the needs with our welcome centers and things like that around the state that we're getting in ill repair, and being able to do that helps us tremendously. To give you a few numbers that might be important to you, since its beginning of the lottery fund, the Lottery Corporation has transferred to DFA for MDOT over $281 million. It's primarily being used in the rehabilitation of two-lane highways. I think we've rehabilitated somewhere around 2,200 miles of two-lane highways with that. Electric and hybrid vehicles, which has been a popular topic as of late. Since 2019, we've received about $4.5 million from the registration fees of that. Roughly about $1.5 million a year is where that revenue collection is beginning to get. And sports betting, nearly $18.5 million since 2019, and it's getting close now to bringing in about $5 million a year. But we tend to spend a lot of time talking about roads and bridges, and our transportation mix, though, as you know, is much more than that. Our intermodal assets, railroads, ports, airports are very critical to our state and to local economies and job creation around the state. And MDOT's invested nearly $200 million in the non-highway modes and public transit since 2005 by funding the Multimodal Transportation Improvement Fund that the legislature created in 2005. Last year alone, the $10 million a year that we put into that, we were able to leverage nearly $250 million in federal funds for projects around the state. And I think as we look at other areas that the legislature might be interested in providing some funds, that is an area in which we might move to try to make us a true Department of Transportation. And the reason I would mention that to you is the $10 million that we put in every year to help fund those grants to leverage the money is $10 million that we're taking from the Office of Highways. So I think it would be more sensible to fund that directly with another source of revenue for the other modes of transportation where we can maximize full uses of all the funds we collect that are meant for roads and bridges. But all of these multimodal assets are interconnected, and that partnership is critical to economic development, movement of goods, and the well-being of our citizens. And finally, I will just touch on something that Commissioner Simmons said very well. The biggest thing that we are facing as we start looking in the future is the current state of inflation around the country, I guess, that we're facing. Asphalt cost has gone up 37% since this time last year. Reinforced steel up 32%. Bridge concrete up 28%. So last year, when you were kind enough to give us an additional $45 million to supplement our paving program, I believe that I'm correct and that figure was arrived at by thinking that at the time was what it would take to add another year's worth of work to the streets. And we were able to stay on schedule, which is good, and we were able to escalate a few projects, but inflation ate up the bulk of that money. So that is a real challenge that we're facing, and that the dollars are just not going as far as where they need to go. But finally, the number one thing that we need, in addition to continuing the momentum that we have, is just the beginning of a conversation about how we're going to fund our transportation system moving forward. I am personally not of the opinion that the fuel tax will be a sustainable form of revenue in a reliable sense the way it has been in years past. With the growth in the federal government incentivizing electric and hybrid vehicles, with, as Commissioner Simmons said, the efficiency of the fuel operated vehicles, with the added roadway that we're having to maintain and take care of, I think that sooner rather than later, we need to have a conversation about how we're going to do that. And I think the legislature has already indicated a positive step in that by finding other sources of reliable income, like the lottery or like the sports betting and other things that we can depend on, that we can count on. But when you're talking about this type of revenue that we're having to generate, that's simply not going to be enough over the long haul. So that's a much needed conversation. But with that, Madam Chairman, I have nothing else that I would say. I'm happy to answer any questions. The 3-year plan that you have, again, the visual is reflected in this map behind me, and I will leave it here for y'all. I know someone else will be speaking about ERBR, so I'm not going to touch on that.
Thank you, Director. We appreciate the good work that you're doing. I believe Senator Blackman has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brett, what is the percentage of monies that MDOT receive for its total budget from the federal government, and what is the total amount that it receives from state government?
We had a budget of $1.43 billion, and I believe our federal revenue was somewhere around 720 million.
And so the state puts in 700.
It's a little better than half normally.
I believe it was in 2021, and I may be mistaken about the year. Commissioner Simmons sent, I know, to the people within the Central District and legislators, and perhaps to all of the members of the Highways and Transportation, a letter that showed the inequities for a substantial number of years for those who were west of I-20, I believe. And I would like to know whether I-55, thank you. I would like to know whether MDOT has addressed any of those inequities, and in particular, as it relates to federal dollars.
Yes, ma'am. I would answer that like this. Most of our federal funds that come to the commission does not have full discretion over how they're spent in the way of like our rehabilitation or paving programs, the interstate maintenance. Those are all things that have to meet certain metrics and that are based on a needs-based type of evaluation that's done with partnership between our professionals and the professionals of Federal Highway Administration. So I think that as far as the spending of federal money from the maintenance side, we're required to spend that in a way that the money is going to where the needs that have been identified are. I think what you may be referring to there and what made up a lot of that list, if you look at where the capacity, and I don't want to speak for Commissioner Simmons, but if you look at where the capacity program is now, that is a program that the elected commission gets to prioritize where those funds go. And obviously each commissioner may have various priorities and various projects that they want to see completed. And I believe that Commissioner Simmons, since he's been on the commission, has helped direct funding to the areas that you're talking about in a way to make sure that the needs are being met to address what he saw as an equity need there. And I think that all that shows is that the elected form of commission works, that they represent the people and that they pick the priorities and where to put the money based on where their constituents, you know, were asking of them. So that's kind of a long way around the barn to tell you, I guess, that I believe we are spending the money in an equitable fashion because I believe that the federal dollars were required to do so. And if we weren't doing that, Federal Highway would have some problems with that. And other than that, I think that's the function of an elected commission. And I feel like Commissioner Simmons would agree that where he had concerns before, those concerns are being set aside now.
Okay, so you're saying prior to, I guess, 2019 or 2020, with us getting Commissioner Simmons, that those needs west of I-55 were not being addressed?
Well, I'm saying that we have a limited number of resources, so whoever the commissioner is has to pick some winners and losers, and they have to choose where to put the money. And previous commissioners may have picked areas that had other needs, whether it would be a higher volume of traffic in Hinds County or Rankin County or Madison County as opposed to the Delta. There are other factors other than traffic that one could take into consideration, from the potential for economic development to safety and other things. And I think that each commissioner looks at those differently. So I feel like we still have needs that are going unmet due to the lack of resources, but I feel like the resources are being spent as wisely as possible to address as much of the need as possible.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Butler, you're recognized for a question.
Yes, Madam Chairman, to you and to this committee, I just want to bring to our attention that we have in the state of Mississippi now some of the finest individuals in the transportation department that we've had in a long time. If you look at the fact that we have Brad, who's been out and been in and come back in, we're blessed. We have Commissioner King, who has served as a senator, and he's out there now, still working. And we have Commissioner Simmons, who have served in the position in the Senate and has chaired the Transportation Committee. So in there, and the individuals there, I feel like a mosquito in a noodles can. We have all we need to make a difference. And I want to bring to their attention that I'm that little termite that's in the wood yard. And I'm looking for things to happen to get the termites out. And there I want to also bring to the attention of the whole committee that we have a nuclear plant in Southwest Mississippi, one of the largest nuclear plants in the United States. And we have problems getting in and out and through that particular facility. We have Alcorn State University that does all kinds of research to improve Mississippi and to produce things that Mississippi need to be more productive. They work well with Mississippi State. We have the historical sites of the state of Mississippi down in this area, because all of you are aware where the first Capitol was located and all the historical things that took place down in that area. We have Sanderson Farm that's located in the area that provide chickens in the area. We have 5 lumber yards that's manufacturing wood in the area. With those things that we have in the area, there's a vast need to focus on what we need to do now. And we have the people in place to help those areas to become more productive. In there with Hazelhurst and Sanderson Farm, if the roads were 4-lane, Sanderson Farm could grow in that area. Because what is happening now, 27 Highway is really holding the progress up in Southwest Mississippi, being 2-lane. 61 is holding the progress up from Tennessee to 84 Highway is holding the progress up on that side. These are things that we really need to focus on, because we look at poverty, we look at sources of income for the state of Mississippi. If infrastructure development were to take place in those areas, you will find that Mississippi would be a state that will move up. And I know for a fact, Brad, you've been to Washington, you've been to all those places, and you know the capabilities we have here. All we have to do is just have the people working together to make those things happen. And I have to agree with Senator Simmons that you all have done a beautiful job in outlining the 3-year plan. And I also want to say that it's incumbent upon you all, the commissioners and the director, to stay on us in providing you with the funds to move Mississippi forward. I see a new day with the people that we have now in the Transportation Department. And I just hope that we can work to make it a reality. I just want to say that, and we're proud of that.
Thank you, Senator Butler. Anybody else have questions? I think it looks like Commissioner Simmons may want to respond to that briefly. We'll allow him the opportunity to respond. Thank you, Commissioner. And I believe Senator McClendon has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you, Commissioner White, what you're doing. Director White, excuse me. On the first page of the introduction, required by, in Mississippi Code, it has the criteria for what you base maintenance purposes and projects on. Public necessity and public safety, number one. Then present and future economic benefit and commercial value. Present and future traffic census, and then route continuity, which Senator Butler has got issues with. How much does that play a part in what's decided on what's being worked? Those four things.
I think they play they play a huge part. I think I go back to what I had mentioned in answering Senator Blackman, that we're in no way suggesting that where we're obligating funds represent all the needs that are in the state. We have more needs and we have resources with which to address them. So there are certainly, you could certainly find projects around Mississippi that you might feel like, represent some of the needs as outlined by that. Again, what goes into building out this plan are the requirements that we have from Federal Highway Administration that dictates quite a bit of it. In regard to capacity, the elected commissioners help set those priorities, and they, due to the situation with needs outweighing the resources, they have to make tough decisions in determining which ones of those may meet every requirement that you're talking about, or may check every one of those boxes, but they're going to have to pick from among those which ones will receive the funding to try to move ahead. I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, that's used across the board, but there is a level of discretion that commissioners have when it comes to large capacity projects.
And I greatly appreciate that. Thank you. I was just wondering how a county that brings in 8% of state's revenue is not on the 2023 maintenance program or not on the 2024.
Well, again, I go back, a lot of those programs are set based on the evaluation of the pavement condition, based on needs that are identified from a team of people that are made up from Federal Highway Administration as well as MDOT, that more or less, maybe this is a crude way of putting it, that takes the politics out of it to be sure that the federal funds that are meant for rehabilitation of our system are spent where they're most needed, not on where the loudest politician may live. And so that is why, I mean, that I don't know any other way. I don't review those lists. I mean, that's purely based on a data-driven process, and it's purely the condition of the roadways as they compare. And that changes from one time to another. If you have an ice storm through North Mississippi or hurricane out of the Gulf that may have some type of change to the conditions of those pavements, when the reevaluation that happens on a regular basis comes back through and those upgrades are made, anytime between now and even the time that the next plan is adopted, you may see some changes that reflect any change in need that the system has picked up.
I mean, I'm just looking at interstate maintenance, 2023, no DeSoto. 2024 in interstate maintenance, no DeSoto. 2025 interstate maintenance, no DeSoto. I don't know. I was just curious. Thank you, sir.
Well, you have a commissioner from DeSoto. You can ask him. I can better answer that than I can.
Yes, sir. And
but you can rest assured that it is a needs-based evaluation of pavement and things like that. That is where we look at the state holistically, and that we try to take care in as fair and equitable way as possible of the needs of the people.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions for Director White? Okay, Director, thank you. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit on the agenda. We're going to go ahead and call up Mr. Jeff Farah. He's the Executive Director of Avia, and he's going to give us an introduction to autonomous vehicles. We're moving him ahead because he is trying to catch a flight out of Jackson Airport. We want to accommodate him and let him get home on time this evening. Mr. Fair, thank you for driving over to be with us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair Branning and members of the committee. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. We have some slides here that we'll be presenting. I understand that each of you has a copy of this deck as well. And so the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is our organization. So we're the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association. I am very proud to represent the unified voice of the autonomous vehicle industry in this country. We represent all facets of the AV industry. And hopefully each of you has had a chance earlier today, or perhaps after this hearing, to see a couple of our member companies' autonomous trucks outside. You have Aurora and Kodiak Robotics, two leaders in autonomous trucking. I think this is a great opportunity for each of you to really see what it is that we're talking about. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what this technology is. And the first thing to understand here is what our members are trying to do is to produce autonomous driving systems that allow for this ADS system to perform a lot of the functions that we do currently as drivers. And so this slide shows you the various levels of automation as we understand them and as we talk about them in our industry. And so over time, a lot of you have had automobiles that perhaps are in the levels of autonomy around 0 to 2, depending on the level of technology that is in your vehicles. I think it's important to understand that this has been an evolution over time, where more and more technology has been coming into the vehicles. And the real paramount concern that I think we're all after here is safety. And I want to get back to that in just a moment. And so when we talk about autonomous vehicles, on this slide, you see levels 4 and 5 that are in the red box. Level 4 is really where our members are focused today in trying to bring autonomous vehicles to the forefront to really benefit all of your constituents. And so there's a key distinction that needs to be drawn here. I mentioned before that there's more and more technology that is coming into vehicles. A lot of times people talk about what they think is really autonomy, but is really just driver assist. These are a lot of the technologies that I mentioned are around levels 2 and 3. These are features that I think that you're increasingly going to see, but they're very distinct from a situation where the human being is not expected to perform any of the functions to get the automobile, the truck, the shuttle, whatever it is, from point A to point B. Insofar as there are humans that are aboard these vehicles, they are the passengers. And that is the key distinction that we need to drive home. And so we wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of how it is that we see AVs in practice. I think that for a long time, people saw capital that going into a lot of these companies. They saw some of the world's greatest engineers trying to tackle this problem. And the question was, when are autonomous vehicles going to be here? And I'm excited to tell all of you that the answer is, they are here today. We have members of ours that are deploying so-called level 4 autonomous vehicles in a variety of places across the United States. A common thing that you might see reported on is around passenger cars. A lot of times these are companies that are interested in a ride-hailing model. So if you go to places like Grand Rapids, Michigan, you go to parts of Arizona, parts of California, you can see these vehicles in action. Another area is around shuttles that are moving around things like residential parks and universities and whatnot that are solving a lot of problems for a lot of these parts of the country. And then you've also got a lot of unmanned vehicle pods that are delivering goods. You see on this slide in the middle there, that's a robot that is delivering Kroger groceries and Domino's Pizza today in Houston, Texas. And then last but certainly not least, and we'll go into a little bit more detail here, is autonomous trucks. And you did see the 2 trucks that are outside of the state capitol today. And so why is it that we are so excited about the future of autonomy? The benefits are absolutely inspiring. The first thing that we need to underscore here, and this is really core to everything that our industry does, is focused on safety. Currently, we have an unacceptably high number of Americans that are dying on our roads. You all know this all too well in Mississippi. In 2021, we had 43,000 people die on American roads. That was an 11% increase from the year before. And if you look out at the Department of Transportation's own statistics, what they show is that overwhelmingly, these are humans that are at fault. These are individuals that are doing things behind the wheel that they should not do. But the great news is that autonomous vehicles never drive drunk, they never drive distracted, they never drive tired. They are built from their very origin to be a perfect driver, to make decisions more quickly than humans can do it, and to be very much in response to a lot of the conditions around them. And so we believe that we are a massive part of reducing fatalities and accidents on America's roads. The second category here that I want to underscore is around mobility. The reality is, for many of your constituents, they don't have a lot of the mobility benefits that some of the rest of us do. They might be physically disadvantaged, they might be elderly, and they are not able to get around in the same way that the rest of us are. We have up here a logo here from one of AVIA's partners, the National Federation for the Blind. I was in Las Vegas last week at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I was listening to a panel discussion from an individual from the National Federation for the Blind. He had lost his vision in his 20s, and he talked about the first time that he ever got into an autonomous vehicle. And he was almost emotional in talking about how he realized that autonomous vehicles are going to deliver a level of independence to people like him that he thought he was never going to know ever again. And that's an amazing thing for a lot of your constituents. In addition to that, there is a significant opportunity here for economic growth and job opportunity. There's some stats from the Volpe Center at the Department of Transportation that we can follow up with in greater detail. I think just within autonomous trucking, there is a proposed $111 billion economic benefit. This is something that will raise wages. It will produce tens of thousands of jobs on an annual basis. And this is something that we're very excited about. And then last but certainly not least, there are significant environmental and fuel efficiency benefits. Many autonomous vehicles are electric vehicles, but even those that are not are much more efficient in terms of how it is they are traveling around. There are certain statistics that show within autonomous trucking that they can make a 10% reduction in fuel efficiency, and that's something that's incredibly promising. So I want to spend a little bit of time here talking specifically about autonomous trucks. And again, we hope that you all appreciate the opportunity here to really take a look at a lot of this technology and understand it. We are in a situation now where I think many Americans and people in Mississippi have come to understand a lot of the supply chain challenges that are going on. The reality is that we have a truck driver shortage in this country of about 80,000 drivers. That is set to double by 2030, according to the American Trucking Association. Autonomous trucking is a massive part of the solution for that truck driver shortage. It will drive more efficiencies. It will reduce the cost of goods moving. And again, this is something that the Department of Transportation at the federal level has flagged as a real opportunity for economic growth. And so I want to talk a little bit about the state of play in terms of where autonomous vehicles are starting to go. This map here gives you a little bit of a demonstration of a lot of the other state activity that has gone on here. The states that are in green are states that have passed legislation that proactively authorizes autonomous vehicles to operate within their borders. You see here that there are 22 states that are in green. There are an additional 10 that have also authorized the testing of autonomous vehicles, but not the full-blown deployment. That is something that our organization is working on. You also see here that the state of Mississippi is currently coded in white, meaning that Mississippi has not taken action yet, and that is something that we are hoping that you all would do. You might be asking yourself, why is it that we need to take action now? What is happening now is that, especially as it relates to autonomous trucking, these vehicles are beginning to be seen on the roads and highways across the country. Some of your neighboring states and places like outside Dallas, Texas, have really become the headquarters for autonomous trucking in the United States. And so as these vehicles are starting to be produced, the technology has really come to fruition. What that means is that there are commercial partnerships that are being set up, and there are routes that are being made. There are considerations here around major port areas, as you all can appreciate. And there is a need to make sure that Mississippi can ultimately proactively authorize the use of autonomous trucks so that Mississippi can ultimately benefit from an economic and safety opportunity. And so to conclude, we hope that you all share the excitement that we have about autonomous trucks. Our industry is absolutely committed to safety. We believe that we have a tremendous amount to offer the American public, and we greatly appreciate the interest of this committee. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Any questions from the committee? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate you coming today. You know, I know that probably a lot of the questions that I have we'll probably need to ask in another setting, because I have a lot of questions when it comes to this, especially in the trucking aspect. I know we have a shortage of truckers, but I've just got a lot of questions dealing with this. When you talk about the autonomous driver, is this a predetermined route that they'll be on, or how does that work?
So the way that the technology is kind of evolving over time is that if we can go back here to the slide here that shows the levels of autonomy. So within level 4, which is really what we're existing in now, which is what our members are ultimately designing technology for today, there are designated areas that the automated driving system is able to operate. And so what a lot of the trucking companies and other companies are doing is designing this geofenced area. In the case of trucking, these are obviously very significantly large geofenced areas that are taking place around freeways and highways. And so in those situations with level 4 autonomy, you do have that geofenced area that is the area that the automated driving system can operate. Ultimately at level 5, this is a go anywhere, anytime kind of a scenario. That is the holy grail. It is not where the technology is currently.
So the technology in the level 4, you would have a geofenced area, point A to point B, and once it got to a certain position, someone would have to get in the truck, say backing it up to a dock or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
So in the case, it's a great question. In the case of autonomous trucks, obviously different businesses are looking at different things, but in a lot of situations, they're looking at kind of a terminal to terminal type of a business where you might have a situation where the truck operates in autonomy when it is traveling between terminals, whether it's from Jackson to Dallas or something like that. When it gets close perhaps to a city center, you would then have it at the terminal. A human would then get into the vehicle and perform the last piece of the task. You would still get all the benefits that would ultimately accrue and all the the various reasons I think this is so exciting during the main part of the driving task, but a human could be involved at that last piece.
Okay. And forgive me because I have not went out and looked at the trucks, but I'm going to assume that they're set up with sensors that are reading conditions outside of the vehicle.
So again, the design of different vehicles tends to be a little bit different. I think one of the great things about seeing the two vehicles that you see there is these are two of the leaders in autonomous trucking. You'll notice that the configuration of how the truck is put together is a little bit different. Fundamentally, they are using things like LiDAR, they are using radar, they are using various sensors and whatnot. All of these things come together to produce the automated driving system. That's kind of the brains of the operation that is really taking advantage of all that technology, collecting it, and then ultimately making the decisions that move the vehicle forward. And so how that is structured in terms of what it looks like tends to be a little bit different from a company to company basis.
One more question. As far as powering of the system that's doing the autonomy, is that linked in with the truck's power source, or does it have a separate power source? Or, I'm just thinking if there's a electrical failure on the truck, is that going to cause computer problems that would lead to, the ability of the system to function, and what would happen at that point?
Everything that is needed for the truck to operate, including all the technology, is housed on the truck. And so this is something where, it's all there physically. And so there have been a lot of gains, I think, in terms of battery and whatnot, but this is something that we can follow up in greater detail to give you a sense of kind of what the power features look like. But my understanding is there's been a lot of advancements in that space.
But what I'm saying, is it a separate power source, or is it the same power source that is powering the vehicle itself?
We would have to let us follow up on that if we might, Senator, to kind of give you a little bit of a stronger sense of like what the technology looks like.
Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Mr. Fair, thank you for your time. We appreciate you making the trip over to speak to us today. Safe travels home.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Chairman Busby from the House, I'm just now realized you're here. Welcome. Thank you for coming. All right, we'll get back on track here. Next speaker up is going to be Mr. Scott Waller, President of MEC. He's here to give us an update on the Emergency Road and Bridge Fund.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come today, but My message is really fairly simple. The Emergency Road and Bridge Repair Fund is successful, and it's essential that we keep funding it as we go forward. I'm really here today in the role of a vice chair of the ERBR Advisory Board that was created with the legislation that passed in the special session in 2018. Mike McCormick chairs that board, has done a tremendous job in that role. Could not be with us today, but asked that I come speak to you. The board is made up of representations from all sectors of the economy, as well as representatives from the counties and the cities. Now, while the advice that this board gives to the Department of Transportation here in Mississippi is non-binding, I will say that MDOT has taken really seriously our concerns that we've raised. They've listened to our suggestions in establishing the rules for governing how these dollars are spent to make sure that ERBR is working in the most efficient way possible. The board meets quarterly to receive updates on the programs and provide input into the process. You know, the goal was to use criteria established by MDOT to identify bridges that fit that emergency category. In other words, what are our greatest needs and how do we deal with them quickly? And while we still have a long way to go, we've made great progress. There's been some big accomplishments in a very small amount of time. I want to kind of go over a few things that's happened with this so far. ERBR 1, which was part of the Modernization Act in the special session in 2018, provided $250 million. Of that, there were 690 applications that were sent in. The requests that were sent in totaled $970 million. They were able to award 168 projects as part of the first bit of funding. The second group, which was $89 million, which is federal dollars, there were 364 applicants, a total of $956 million requested, and 16 projects were awarded in that one. ERBR 3, which was the most recent 2022, $100 million, which was focused only on local projects. There were 378 applications received, which request total of about $700 million. There were 61 projects awarded in that. Thus far, there are 147 projects that have been completed in ERBR 1. As I pointed out, the funding for ERBR 2 and 3 came in the last year and a half, so those projects are currently underway. This is also having an impact all across the state. 80 counties have received at least one project in this process, and more importantly, it's putting Mississippians to work. And I think this is where it really, when it boils down to it, of the 183 contracts awarded in the first group, 41 contractors received awards. In ERBR 3, there have been 13 contracts awarded so far, and there have been 10 contractors that will be working on those projects. I think, again, the money provided in ERBR 2 was federal funds, as I mentioned. With that comes certain requirements that must be met with those federal funds that are not applicable when state funds are being used for the projects. So that's part of the reason that group of projects has not moved as quickly, but they're very important projects that will be all across the state. ERBR 3, it's important to note that the counties typically and cities do not submit for funding until the award has been given. But we feel like that even though there have only been 13 so far, I talked to MDOT yesterday to say the last time we met, we felt like we were moving in the right direction. Is that still on track? They believe that it is. They believe they're working as fast as they can. Given that those funds did not become available until July 1, the projects then had to be approved and then had to be in the process of awarding it. So I think we're making great progress on that front when you look at where we are. You know, ERBR is a big part of an overall plan of what we got to do for transportation infrastructure here in the state of Mississippi. And while, as Director White pointed out, a sustainable source of funding for state projects is very important. We believe ERB is a big part of the process at the local level. You know, MDOT has really done a tremendous job in providing information, being transparent, and really listening to what the advisory board has to say. which we're very excited about what we've been able to accomplish in a very short period of time. So again, I'll just say, this program has been a success. It's essential we continue to fund it to address needs at the local level.
Thank you for that. I agree. I'm a fan of the program. I think it's working very nicely. Would you mind giving the committee members an idea of the criteria that is used when the projects are being reviewed and selected?
Well, when we first sat down with MDOT as the advisory board and asked them what did they need to do, there were a variety of things that were taken into consideration. The amount of traffic on a bridge, the overall condition of a bridge. It also may include residents on one side or the other of the bridge. So all of these things were put together. And again, MDOT's a lot more, I guess, fluent in explaining all of this, but there was really a long list of criteria that was important in making sure we were addressing the greatest needs first. And I give them credit for doing that. They asked the advisory board to provide input into this process at the beginning. I think that most of the members of the board would probably tell you they feel comfortable that they really did listen to what we had to say to make sure that we were focusing on what was the economic impact. Were there, particularly on, and again, as I mentioned, Mr. McCormick being the head of Farm Bureau, what was the impact on agriculture? What was the impact on industry? All of those things were taken into account as they looked at what the criteria for those bridges would be.
Okay, any questions from the committee? Any questions? All right, Mr. Waller, thank you for coming over. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Mr. Harry Lee James with State Aid. He's going to talk to us about the condition of bridges in the state.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, or Chairwoman, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. Preparing for this since back in November, so finally it's here, so we'll get down to it. I've got I think all of the committee members have a copy of the handout that I've got before you. About 30 copies in that folder up there. Anybody can get one of those that would like. Plus, I think Deborah's going to put it out possibly on the internet or something later on for public consumption or whatever like that. So it is public information. Just beware, it's good for one day, and things change. Is that better, Senator? Okay. Okay. What do we got up here on the screen? That's the poster child for ERBR. That bridge went down on December the 29th outside of Woodville, Mississippi, Jackson Point Road across the Buffalo River. It's a dead-end road that stops at the banks of the Mississippi River. Unfortunately, there are people that live and operate on the other side of the bridge that had to be boated out of there. There may still be some people there if they went to Louisiana to get out. It was funded with ERBR money this past session to the tune of, I think, $5.87 million, plus it had a previous $1 million bond commitment of $1 million from Senate Bill 2971. So hopefully there's adequate funding there to build the new bridge. That one does need to be repaired though, so that it can be utilized because the new bridge is on new alignment. That's the reason the old one wasn't taken out, because it had to be in place so people could get it, because there's significant agricultural and petroleum interest on the other side of the bridge. That is what is known as a workover rig. This bridge was posted at 21 tons. The weight of that vehicle is 102,000. So, just like a speed limit sign, it says don't speed, and you want to go 80 and it says 45, well, you might get caught. Well, this one was a black and white sign, said 21 tons. Might get caught. Well, he made it over back in early November. He didn't make it back. And that rig is still hung up on that bridge. Hopefully it'll be taken out this weekend. Carlos, if you want to take that down, that'll be fine. All right, where did all this start? 2018, with Governor Bryant's emergency declaration in April of that year, over 540 closed bridges statewide. We're now down to, I think, 242. It's not that we fixed that many bridges with all the money that's been provided to the counties with all of this, but it's a matter of adopting some new approaches to looking at and managing the bridge inventory from a cradle to grave aspect to taking bridges off the inventory that didn't need to be there. And I have to commend Chairman Busby for helping me with that in years past. That was a great thing we were able to do. And I'm hoping to do something similar to that with state aid bridges in the future. Your third page, you're looking at kind of a funding summary. You can look and see the total number of bridges on the state aid system, and then you subtraction will show you how many are local system. Local system bridges are doing fine. Y'all did a wonderful thing, and one thing that came about out of that extraordinary session in 18, probably the best thing, was the use tax. I mean, it provided a significant amount of money to the local system bridge program, which funds just local system bridges. And then the counties get a big chunk out of it, as well as the cities to use on their infrastructure. So it has made a world of difference, and I think my follow-up speaker will attest to that as well. However, there's one thing: state aid bridges have no funding source at all. They compete for the funding that is provided to us through the legislature on an annual basis in our appropriation for roads or bridges. And you can tell after 4 years, you see where the weak spots are, and that's where it is. So you look over at the bottom of that third page, shows the needs statewide, almost 750 million for state aid. And these are just bridge needs now. These are not road needs. And then 1.3 billion statewide to fix all our problems. Realizing that's not going to happen overnight. Doesn't need to happen overnight, but it needs to be planned for in the future. Because they're not getting any younger just like us. And eventually, do we want to wait till they get posted and closed? Or do we want to proactively get rid of these and reduce the number out there that are potentially going to cause problems for us? The next page shows you kind of a progression of the funding through ERBR over the course of time. And what has happened, a total of 483 million total has been put toward it with that and the use tax for the LSVP program. But look at the numbers, how they've gone down. Basically, the total number of bridges is about remained the same. The number of bridges posted has actually gone up because we're looking at more bridges now in more detail than we did in the past. The number of closed bridges has gone down by over half or close to half. And then the state aid bridges that are posted is about half of all those 1,800 something bridges that are posted. So the money's just not being spent on those like it is the other, because again, I can attest that money is competitive whether the counties are spending on a road or bridge. So there just is not enough funding to cover both in the counties now. State aid bridges, I had committed earlier in the board term that I wanted to reduce that number by half. We far outdone that. We started out in 2020 at 173. We're down to 74 now. It'll continue to come down with ERBR funding and whatever else. But it's been a challenge. It really has. The next page with the map of the United States shows, and there's some information that Mike Pepper with Road Builders has sent me. We were number 12 in bad bridges in the nation in 2017. We're number 25 now. We didn't even make the top 20. When they listed, when this came out on the newswire, they said, look at the top 20 states. We weren't even in that. So we basically have improved by half of where we were. However, if you look at the roadside, the rural roads, we went from number 8 to number 6. So we see where the money's being spent, which is the good thing. However, we can't continue on that path without it. So I'm hoping that maybe with some additional state aid funding that can be dedicated to bridges, it'll free up the existing state aid money from the fuel tax to go back to funding state aid roads in the counties, which are much needed. Those are the only two programs that we have that come through state aid that y'all fund on an annual basis through our appropriation, is the state aid program and the local system bridge program. Local system funded through use tax, state aid program funded through fuel tax. Got a couple of maps for you. One, the first one you see is the location of all the posted and closed bridges in the state. The blue counties are counties that did not receive ERBR funding this time. There were like 40 of them. And that's from this past $100 million in funding. So we've still got pockets of bridges, bad bridges up in the Delta area, south, up in the northeast part of the state that need to be focused on. Not picking them off one or two at a time. Sometimes it doesn't, it can make a difference in some people's lives, but you really got to get in there with a program and try to, wipe some things out. What's more concerning is, as much as anything, though, is the next page, the next map. The blue counties, again, are ERBR funded, but look at the bad bridges. They're also close to a school. There were roughly 500 bridges around the state that cannot carry a school bus. Those are problematic to me. It's a safety issue as well. The next sheet you see is the, Carlos, could you pull that back up to what we had before, the rig? Okay. And then go to your next page in your handout. And what do you see? A bunch of school buses. Close your eyes and think about if that was a school bus on that bridge. What will we be talking about today? That'll be throwing money at me right and left to solve this problem. And we're doing everything we can, but as opposed to MDOT can take their money and move it wherever they need to. When I get $1, the first thing I have to do with it is divide it by 82, because there are 82 counties in the state, whether it's LSPP money, state aid money, or whatever else that comes in. The only money we don't divide up like that is something that comes through MDA on a project like that. And then last, in Mike's honor or whatever, look at the value of the Mississippi agricultural industry to the state. Nearly $10 million renewable about on an annual basis. Think of what is happening to our locals and agricultural industry with these posted bridges. What could be? How much, that number might be a lot more than that. The value, I know, has got a lot to do with the crop prices and everything. Since you're younger, you know very well what happens. Things go up and things go down. But think of how better it would be. You had a lot of places you could go that you can't go now because of all the bad roads and bridges we have in the state at the local level. So, and then the last sheets are just strictly some statistics on the bridges in each county. So if you want to see what each county has to deal with, that's a good place to start. Madam Chair, I'm through. I'll yield to any questions that you or any committee member may have. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. This is a lot of good, helpful information. Any questions? Senator Bryan, you're recognized for a question.
Well, I noticed that one of the figures I think you mentioned is that the estimated cost for replacing all the closed and posted state aid bridges was $750 million, and to replace all the closed and posted bridges that are not part of the state aid program would be another 1.3. It's roughly $2 billion.
No, sir, that's not in addition to, that's adding, that 1.3 includes the state aid.
So it's a total of 1.3.
That's correct. Look at the line above those numbers there where it says state aid bridges. There are 10% more state aid bridges than they are local system bridges. They're also 71% bigger than the bridges on the local level. That's why the local system bridges, they're so much cheaper to rebuild, or you might could put a pipe or a culvert in or something, a box culvert, as opposed to a bridge. Most of the state aid bridges that have to be replaced with a bridge.
We're only talking about bridges now. We're not talking about building any new roads. We're not talking about maintaining any existing roads. We're talking about repairing bridges, and it's 1.3 billion. And I guess you could spend some additional money on these other roads, and you look at those figures and you say, how on earth could you ever come up with that amount of money? It's just beyond our means. Bless their hearts, they're doing the best they can with the money they got, and that ain't so. A number of years ago, we passed a tax cut that took $500 million a year out of the state budget, much of it going out of state to out-of-state taxpayers. This past session, we passed another tax cut with another $500 million a year going out of the state, going out of the budget. And you sit here and we need 1.3 just to keep the bridges from falling down on the state aid and county roads. And you wonder, when they're voting on the tax cuts and talking about tax cuts and rebate checks and how everything's funded, we don't need nothing, and the budget is fully funded, everything. We've covered everything. You wonder where the advocates are for the bridges and for highways. Why aren't they walking the halls to try to kill the tax cuts? And why aren't they walking the halls to stop the bleeding this year? And my question is, don't you agree with me?
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Any other member have questions? All right, Mr. Haley, thank you for your time. Appreciate you coming over.
Yes, ma'am. Thank y'all.
Yes, sir. Senator Horn, you're recognized. Mr. Haley, I believe we've got a question, please. If you could come back to the podium. Thank you.
I'm sorry for my late question, but I couldn't help but notice that there are 19 closed bridges in Hinds County. There are 40 some odd bridges that are closed in Washington County. And a few other counties have what I would call out of elevated closures that, and when you said you have to take your money that you get and divide it by 82. So for those counties that have a larger amount of closures, is there any way to close that gap? You know, I'd like to see Hinds County get down to 3 or 4 bridges being closed, if that many. And the same with Washington County, 44, whatever the number is, seems to me to be really, really high. 12 in Sunflower, 11 in Tallahatchie, 28 in Washington County. So how do we deal with those repairing those bridges if you're divvying up the money equally in 82 counties?
Well, the money is not divided up equally. but it does have to be divided into 82 different increments. A lot of it is based on the number of bridges in each county, the population, road mileage. There's several things that factor into the state aid formula. The LSBP formula is different. It takes into account the number of bridges in each county and how big those bridges are. That's what I was trying to point out. The state aid bridges overall are a lot bigger statewide than just the local system bridges. So the allocation of those funds that come through us are set in statute. I mean, that's something y'all would have to change. So, and there will be, because of the census that just occurred, there will be some slight changes in the state aid formula in 2024 going out to the counties. And we work in board term, 4 years. We project out the monies they're going to have over that 4-year board term, and then they set up their programs as to and identify what they want to work on, you know, the projects that they want to, whether they're roads or bridges, whatever. In Hinds County, a good many of those bridges are in the city of Jackson, not just, I mean, they're in Hinds County, but they're in the city of Jackson. We have nothing, you know, no impact on those.
So they're kind of on their own. And
well, they are to a certain extent. I mean, we help all of them all we can. The LSBP law requires that each county help a municipality with its local system bridges where it can. It doesn't say you've got to spend 25% on local system bridges or whatever, but there's agreements made where, you know, if they've got one, I know down on the coast here recently, there've been a couple that have, you know, gone to contract and much needed replacement. Some in over in Lauderdale County that need to be replaced. But then I think the city over there kind of got, I don't say greedy, but was wanting a little bit more money to do some things with. And the county had already funded a couple of bridges for them. Said, no, we've got enough to ease our own. There are pockets all around the state. And whether you want to call it genetics or just bad practices or whatever, but we're still dealing with a lot of bridges that have a timber component. Not to knock the timber industry, but the timber has no place in a bridge unless it's going over it in a truck.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I want to recognize Governor Hosemann. Thank you for stopping in for the hearing today. We appreciate you. Senator McClendon, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, some of these counties have 0% bridges closed. Is that because they've had a local maintenance program with the supervisors? It's not just waiting on the state aid money, it's local money working. Is that?
That's correct. In many cases, DeSoto County, Lamar County, pockets around the state, they're willing to utilize their own resources and either supplement their state aid money or go off on their own and do bond issues to make sure. I think Lamar County a few years ago had some deaths down there, maybe some students from the university, and they just took it upon themselves and said, this doesn't need to happen again. And so they made a commitment with an extensive program to go in there and get rid of a bunch of bad bridges. And consequently now they've got, you know, not bad things to deal with, and it frees up that money for them to use on other things in the county. So there's a benefit to it, but you've got to get over the hump to be able to reach that point where you can utilize that money for other parts of your infrastructure. Again, the use tax has been a boom to the counties, both through LSBP funding, you know, through us, or the money that goes directly to them in the 15% set aside each time. I mean, it's made a world of difference in their road and bridge programs.
Thank you, sir.
Other questions from the committee? All right, thank you, sir. Yes, Senator Blackman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those counties that you just identified as not as having 0 bridges in need of repair, aren't those counties with significant tax bases?
Most of them do, but not all of them do. It just depends. I mean, if you look up in the Delta, you look in Bolivar County, you look in Washington County, a lot of the problems up there are because of the agricultural interest up there, the fertilizers, the chemicals, and the, you know, cotton field, soybean and everything that come down, and things just don't last forever. And so they attack things, and so they deteriorate prematurely. Just like me and you, if something happens to us, we've got to go to the doctor and find a way to mitigate it so we could, you know, live our longest lives. Same thing we try to do with bridges and everything too, but nothing lasts forever. So. Okay,
so you're saying that your Bolivar County example, the Delta, I guess in particular, that their deterioration is as a result of the agriculture, I guess the big trucks and...
Part of it may be that, but you can also go down into the Brookhaven, Copiah County area. They were blessed with a bunch of timber bridges down there, and they're suffering that. And I don't know that that's a big, you know, power base economy down there now, any more so than any other area of the state.
Okay, but back to my original question, the counties that you identified, Lamar County and DeSoto, those are the two that you named in particular, with zero problems with bridges. Are those counties with significant tax bases?
I don't know that, ma'am. I don't keep up with that kind of information. All I keep up with bridges in each county and their condition. The Safe Bridge is open. If you go to a bridge and it's closed, don't go across.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the counties. And I believe Steve Gray is here to present on behalf of the Supervisors Association.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, to the committee. Thank you for allowing us to have an opportunity to speak. I also want to thank Mr. Harry Lee James, let you know we do work close with him in his office. Periodically, we constantly have updates, and he speaks for our membership. So it's been a good team effort, and the county's working with him. I also want to echo my appreciation of just over the years. I've been in my role with the association since 2007, advocating this issue, and the things you've done from the creation of the ERBR, as Scott Waller talked about, but more specifically, even the use tax. This has been very helpful. From a county standpoint, one of the biggest issues we're finding, I guess, trending going forward, and here's back on Mr. Harry Lee James regarding state aid funding. We're finding that counties are supplementing what they get with their use tax funds. You know, that particular source of revenue as a part of the fuel tax was designed to address state aid. And, you know, as costs continue to go up, it's not really getting the job done. And so the use tax has been a lifesaver in terms of coming in and helping with those specific projects going forward. So any help that we can do to help shore up more with state aid funding, and again with ERBR, that's another added plus that we've been able to take advantage of. We greatly appreciate that. But for the most part, I'll yield. That's my statement, and yield the floor for questions.
Hey, do any members have questions for Mr. Gray as it pertains to the Supervisors Association or the county level? Okay, seeing none, we appreciate you coming over. We're going to move to the cities, municipalities, and we've got Mayor Barker here from the Hattiesburg area that's going to speak to us.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Toby Barker, and I have served as mayor of the city of Hattiesburg since 2017. And prior to that, I served 10 years in the Mississippi House of Representatives and had the privilege of working on conference committees with several of you. And given that I am a recovering legislator, I do understand the attention span of a lawmaker and the need for brevity. I do want to acknowledge some other mayors in the room, Chip Johnson and his board from Hernando, Ricky Garrett, an alderwoman from Clinton, also our legislative chair for the Municipal League, and then our president of our city council, Jeffrey George. And today I'll share some insights on how cities, particularly Hattiesburg, are using infrastructure funding initiatives created by the legislature, and offer a few suggestions on how these programs can be tweaked to better support communities across the state. But first, thank you. The past few years' focus on local roads, bridges, water, sewer, and stormwater systems, the very infrastructure that affects everyday people, has been monumental and game-changing. I remember when we struggled to push 10 or 20 million into the LSBP program each session, sometimes failing to put any money at all in. And so these new funding opportunities, both recurring and one-time, mean something real and tangible for the folks in your districts. And first, I'll mention the use tax. Of course, passed in 2018 as part of the special session of the Mississippi Infrastructure Modernization Act. There we go. Sorry. And it diverted part of the use tax, commonly referred to as the internet sales tax, for municipalities to invest in roads, bridges, water, and sewer systems. And funding was phased in over 4 years. And how much a city receives depends on their population and the amount of sales tax they produce. And to make sure local governments had skin in the game, it required us to maintain certain levels of spending on that infrastructure so that this program supplemented our own investment and not supplanted it. And for Hattiesburg, we have taken, it's been used to address a number of critical projects in our city. We have taken a pay-as-you-go approach. Some cities have taken out bonds and borrowed against expected revenue, allowing them to complete several critical projects and then pay the money back as use tax revenue comes in each year. We have used the tax revenue to do lots of things, to pave major corridors, some of which would have eaten up almost our entire annual paving budget. We have used this to match other state and federal grants for larger transportation projects. And at times we have used this to deal with some emergency bridge replacements in our own town. And this has been an incredibly useful tool. And so as this program continues forward, there are some adjustments that the legislature might want to consider. First, while drainage work is often part of any major road, bridge, and even sewer work, it is not expressly allowed as an expense in the law itself. While implied that stormwater needs can be met as part of larger projects, it would make all of our city attorneys feel a lot better if the legislature would spell out that we can indeed use the use tax revenue for stormwater projects. Secondly, as we try to tackle bigger projects, it would be beneficial to have some consideration for soft costs, design, right-of-way acquisition, utility relocation, and certainly the legislature's intent that this money needs to go to actual brick and mortar projects, that needs to remain. And requiring that cities and counties take care of those soft costs is a way to ensure that local governments have skin in the game. However, for our smaller communities in the state, getting a project to shovel-ready status is sometimes difficult. And finally, in the name of helping small communities, if the legislature decides to open up this code section for the use of the use tax diversion, it would help small towns to have the base amount. That's the amount that everybody gets, $3 million divided among all municipalities, increase from $3 million to some higher amount. That would make sure that even the small towns got a little bit more. Next, I'll speak to the Senate's innovative approach to leveraging American Rescue Plan funding, ARPA money, through matching grants. Last year's creation and $450 million funding of the ARPA matching grant program, which we refer to as MCWI, incentivized cities to steer their finite one-time federal money towards transformational projects that, in the Lieutenant Governor's words, will last more than a generation. These provided state matches, usually 1-to-1, but in smaller communities, 2-to-1, projects to deal with water, sewer, and stormwater. And this program has the potential to be nothing short of trailblazing and revolutionary. While the application and scoring process has been cumbersome, I believe these growing pains are part of any new program, and many of the challenges will hopefully be ironed out in the second round of applications that are open right now. Nonetheless, the MCWI program is game-changing, and here's why. So Hattiesburg is 140 years old. Like cities that age or older, stuff breaks. We deal with undersized and aging water lines. We are under a consent decree for sanitary sewer overflows called SSOs, and SSO is when the manhole overflows during a hard rain because stormwater is infiltrating the sewer line, and it's definitely frowned upon by the EPA. We are actually 2 years into a 16-year plan to rehabilitate our sewer system. And furthermore, like most cities, we have no recurring source of money to deal with stormwater projects. So how did MCWI ARPA matching grants help us? We received $12.8 million in ARPA funds. In the first round of matching grants, we applied for 7 projects and were funded for 3, totaling $3.52 million of state funds. And this covers 2 really big water and sewer projects and 1 big stormwater project. And we're currently in the second round of applications submitting 5 additional projects, which if approved will mean that almost all of our ARPA allocation went to transformational water, sewer, and stormwater projects. And so $12.8 million is leveraged into over $20 million in direct infrastructure investment. This is real stuff, and it matters to my city and to cities and towns across the state, and I'm grateful to all of you for that. Now, 1 year in, there are a few suggestions that we would offer to this committee on strengthening the MCWI ARPA matching grant program. First, number one, $450 million was put into the program last year's session. The second round of applications will likely exhaust that full amount. And that's a good thing. It means your goal of incentivizing cities to do the right thing worked. But there needs to be another infusion of funding this session. You know, 100 million, 200 million, we're not going to limit you. However many zeros you want to include, we'll certainly appreciate. Number two, in the language that sets this program up, please make the change that allows cities to use non-ARPA funds to match as their local match. Many towns and cities like mine have done the politically hard work in raising rates in recent years to pay for capital improvements. And while I may be limited to $12.8 million in my local ARPA allocation, we could use our regular water and sewer funds that our citizens pay as match to draw down more money and to do more water and sewer projects. Number three, for future sessions into the next term, know that this program needs to continue past the ARPA era. This needs to become as important as the local system bridge replacement or any other transportation programs, because we have seen what happens if we don't invest in our water and sewer systems. And if any of you are interested, as an old appropriator, I can share with you a budget mechanism that you could use to ensure annual funding in MCWI if any of you want to have that conversation later. And then finally, on number four, on behalf of our small towns, there is a need for funding to help smaller communities get the shovel ready. It costs money to hire an engineer to do design on a water and sewer system upgrade. It costs money to purchase right-of-way, and these soft costs can be prohibitive for many small towns. And finally, you've already heard this reported on, is the ERBR, Emergency Bridge Repair Program. We've had 4 rounds of funding since its inception in 2018. Last year, 7 of 61 awarded projects went to municipalities, and while we certainly would love to see more than that, our priority is to see a 5th round of funding for ERBR. And so, to sum it all up, the legislature has become an active partner and a critical partner in our infrastructure future. You, the members of this committee, and your leadership are to be commended. However, I need to use this last minute to warn you of an approaching fiscal cliff that will drastically and adversely affect cities and counties, particularly as you want us to spend our money on infrastructure. And it threatens to undo much of the assistance you've given us over the last 5 years. And that threat has to do with PERS. At its December meeting, as you probably know, the PERS board voted to increase the employer contribution to 22.4%. That's a drastic jump from the current rate of 17.4%. That's a 28% increase in what we have to pay in retirement cost. Now, we've been through these before, and we have figured it out, but never has the increase been so much at one time. And this will shift a significant burden to local governments. Now, the legislature typically covers the increase for state agencies, and obviously that's expected, but it doesn't cover the contribution increases for cities and counties. And this unheard increase of 22 to 22.4% is going to decimate some local government budgets across the state. And for Hattiesburg, it's going to cost us $1.5 million just to maintain. And whether we eliminate positions or cut capital projects that you want us to invest in, or do a millage increase, we'll have to make it work. But we can. I mean, we're fiscally sound, though it will hurt. But there are some towns and counties in your districts that probably cannot handle that. And so as this session goes on, know that local governments are looking for help to cushion that blow. Otherwise, even the best incentives that you've made available to us to invest in these transformational projects will be sidelined because of this PERS increase. So it's a conversation we hope to have with you. And aside from that one downer, we are grateful for your support. Strong cities and towns make a strong state. And through these new programs, we hope to prove you right. We will make good on your faith in us, and the future is full of opportunity for further partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like a copy of your slide presentation, if you don't mind, at some point.
Absolutely.
Any questions? Yes, Senator Bryan.
Thank you. Going from backward to first, I would support and have advocated the state sending money to cities and counties and school districts to cover the increase in the PERS assessment. You mentioned the necessity or the desirability of the legislature funding this program on a recurring basis. And I can only say, if only we could imagine some recurring source of revenue that we could use to fund this recurring need that you mentioned. But I wanted to direct your attention to the dilemma of the very small municipalities who did not get much ARPA money. As you know, rural water systems were eligible for grants up to $2.5 million with no match at all required. But small municipalities got ARPA funds in the amount of something like 100 grand. And so even if you take your 100 grand and get the 2-for-1 match, that's $300,000 when your neighboring water and rural water district got $2.5 million and didn't have to put up any sort of match. So I was just wondering, when you mentioned some changes that might be desirable if we did something else, did you think about the dilemma of the very small municipalities?
That's a great point, Mr. Chairman. And I will tell you that I've, in this role with MML, been able to travel around and visit a lot of these small towns. And every town has about a $2 million project that they need to complete, whether it's for a lagoon or for to replace a sewer main. Everyone has one of those projects. And so an enhanced match for small towns, I think is a great idea. I think that a lot of our towns, even with the current grant program, are struggling with the soft costs about how to get to a project to bid and shovel ready because they don't have the money to go and hire an engineer or to do any sort of planning to figure out what it is they need to do in the first place. And so I would submit that while I would certainly support an enhanced or tweaking that where small towns can draw down more money, I think there needs to be some non-ARPA money that's out there for them to do some planning, similar to what our federal DOT does for communities right now, and we're submitting for transportation projects.
Okay, other questions or comments? Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate your time. Our final speaker, we're going to be focusing on the Mississippi River flooding and an update on that. So we've got Mr. Robert Maxwell here from the Port of Rosedale that's going to give us an update on that.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to present today, and thank y'all for being here. First of all, thank you for your support for the ports, and particularly for the Ports Improvement Fund through MDA that was recently done this past year. Many of you on this committee are lucky enough to have a port in or very near your district, and therefore understand the importance of ports to your particular areas and to the state. Senator Bryan, I believe you get an award for, you get several awards, but you get an award for the most ports in one district. So,
Mr. Maxwell, if you could get a little closer to that mic so we can make sure everyone can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. But anyway, thank you on behalf of all my port directors for your support that you've already given to us, and we certainly appreciate it. Ports, and more particularly ports on our inland waterways, are often overlooked by many in the general public, just mainly because it's not something that they think of because it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. Ports are, however, integral contributors to the economic well-being of the areas where they're located and beyond. They're typically one of the largest economic drivers for their respective areas, and while the direct impacts they provide are significant, the indirect benefits they create can be exponential in magnitude for their regions. Port of Rosedale is one such port on an inland waterway. That inland waterway happens to be the Mississippi River, which is the largest drainage basin in the United States, the second longest river in North America behind the Missouri River, but only by 1 mile. And the 15th largest river by discharge volume in the world. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimated that in 2019, the Mississippi River carried more than 500 million short tons of imports, exports, and domestic freight. The Port of Rosedale is one of 15 public ports statewide, 16 if you count Biloxi, Mississippi is fortunate to have navigable water on 3 sides of her, with 5 on the Mississippi River, 6 on the Tenn-Tom Waterway, 3 on the coast, and 1 on the Yazoo River. Because of this, there really isn't much in the way of freight transportation that can't be moved on the water in Mississippi. Carl, you can just let it play. And I apologize, there's no music. It looks like it should be. As you can see in some of these images, ports are extremely resilient under most conditions. Many of us are able to continue to operate at usual high and low water levels. The safety of shipping on water is much greater than by rail or truck. The fuel economy is significantly greater, and the emissions are significantly lower for each per ton mile in comparison. But we can't do it alone. As we have recently seen, also, there are limitations. This is why it's very important to invest in a system of transportation infrastructure that is truly multimodal and intermodal. This recent extreme low water condition that we experienced for an extended period of time on the Mississippi River is a prime example of the need for efficient and effective multimodal transportation access in the state. To rely on any one mode of transportation for various goods and commodities could have a potential negative impact across the entire economy should that mode fail to operate effectively. We're still experiencing some of those negative impacts on the river, and system-wide resiliency for the entire freight transportation network in the state is vitally important for where we are currently, but it is imperative for our future. I'll be glad to answer any questions. Don't have a lot of data yet collected from the low water. We're definitely still going through some of that. Talking with transportation officials and but even just farmers and some of the businesses locally, some of the things that we've experienced is a dramatic increase in barge freight rate for shipping everything, a significant shortage in available barges, empty barges to be loaded during that time period. I can speak obviously for the Port of Rosedale, but during the low water condition we had for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, we had over 130 barges actually sitting in the harbor. Those barges in that shot there were actually sitting on the bottom, and they were already light loaded to begin with. And they sat there for almost 3 weeks before we could move them out. So that is one of the reasons we would love, and something that I've been trying to do, is to rehabilitate our railroad. We have a short line rail coming out of the port that connects with the CNG at Metcalf. And this would have been a wonderful opportunity to try to transfer some grain to rail for that, because I know a lot of farmers had some unanticipated costs as far as storing grain that they weren't originally planning on storing. It should have been shipped out. They had to get insurance on it that they weren't planning on doing. They had to truck it further away, that sort of thing. So the costs were exponential and just very far reaching, I guess, for what has happened. And we don't really know yet what the total cost is going to be. So.
Do you have an anticipated time frame for when conditions may improve and you won't see these negative impacts?
They have. The river's back up now, and things are more or less back to normal. The problem that we have is typically, or generally always, the harvest season, which is our busiest time of the year. And I'm not the only port that has that situation, but harvest season is also the low water season for the river. It's just typically just naturally going to be low in the winter, which is good, really, because you got your spring thaw and your snow melt that's coming down, and you want to make room for that so we don't have any more big flood issues. But we're more or less back to normal. The problem is that we're trying to catch up as far as on grain loading, but I'm afraid we're not going to be able to catch up on a lot of it because a lot of it got shipped out another way during this time period. So there's some of that tonnage that's lost that's going to be lost and not ever going to be made up this year.
Other questions from the committee? Okay, Mr. Maxwell, we appreciate you coming over to share with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And if there's no other business before the committee, will be adjourned.